August 2023, National Cabinet set a target to build 1.2 million homes in 5 years. That's 240k annually, more than we've ever built before. 1 year in and we're 61,000 homes behind. Meanwhile, nearly 3,000 construction companies collapsed last year alone. And today we bring together Australia's leading property economist, I believe, and one of Sydney's most prolific developers to answer what went wrong, can we fix it, and what does it really take to build our way out of this? This is a Property Now podcast brought to you by Coposit. I'm Michael Carbone. My friends call me Carbs, and it's great to have my friends at the table here today. I want to start with ladies first. Eliza Owen, one of the biggest economists, Cotality, of course, but anyone that switches on the news, if there's a property story, you're usually making a comment, so they might know your face. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. And thanks, I'm assuming, for letting me call you Carbs.
We're friends, so yes,
I love it.
Yeah, perfect.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Andrew Hrsto, I just found out, the founder of ALAN, and I just found out this is your first ever podcast. So very proud to have you here, mate. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite. Hopefully it's one of many to come.
Well, the unfortunate thing is you're a Parramatta fan, but we'll put that aside.
Tragic one.
Be careful. Tragic one. Put that aside. Speaking of Parramatta fans, of course, Chris Ferris, CEO Coposit, always here by my side, which I love having.
Pleasure to be here, Carbs. Thank you, mate.
So, guys, we'll go straight into it. And I know there's a lot of data which we're going to get from you, Eliza, and we're going to get some coalface stories as well from you, Andrew. But 2023, the big announcement, we're going to build 1.2 million homes. It's what we need over a 5-year period. 1 year in, how's it going?
Not great. No surprises, right? So if we're looking to hit 1.2 million homes in a 5-year period, you're looking at roughly 240,000 completions a year. The latest data this month came out from the ABS up to the first year of the Accord target period, and it showed about 175,000 homes were completed. So we're short 65,000 homes, down 27% from that annual target in the first year. And what's worse is that it's a falling trend. So year on year, the dwelling completions were down 4% as well. So it's looking a little bit bleak at this stage. And realistically, historically, we've only ever really achieved just over 1 million completions in a 5-year period in the 2010s under much more supportive interest rate and investment conditions.
Yeah, so things heading down.
That's right.
You've been vocal about why. Are there some reasons why you think this is happening?
Well, and I'm sure, Andrew, I'm sure we can all talk to this.
Yes.
I think that one of the big challenges is that heading into the Accord target, it was a more challenging environment. 2023, you still had interest rates at a relative high and climbing rapidly from their lows during the initial stages of the pandemic. But the pandemic had already brought forward a lot of demand for new housing under the home builder scheme, which was available for that 10-month period over 2020, 2021. So by the time the government had announced this new target, they'd done so in an environment economically that was a lot more challenging and in a bit of a vacuum of demand because of the purchases that had been brought forward prior.
Yep. So the target may have been a bit of a pre-COVID sort of opinion, but now moving forward, maybe that sort of needs to be tweaked. Andrew, I know you have some strong opinions on this, and you mentioned earlier before we started rolling that there used to be cranes in like every suburb of Sydney. Yeah. You can look out from your new tower in Parramatta across Sydney, and there's no cranes out there anymore.
Yeah, that's correct. If you could get in a car and drive around Western Sydney, you could almost put your bottom dollar on it. There wouldn't be a crane that's actually building a residential tower. There's numerous reasons, one, economics, but I find it's more productivity, rising construction costs, and also, the high rates levies that sort of can't be absorbed in the western suburbs. So it's not one singular reason. It's productivity, cost of construction, and high rates and levies.
Well, let's break that down because, you guys are probably one of the most prolific builder developers in New South Wales. There's a lot of ALAN projects out there, and especially your history has been very much Western Sydney based. You're sort of moving out elsewhere as well now. What does it take to construct apartments?
I don't know if it's by choice
Yeah.
as well, right?
Yeah.
It's
No, it's
you're
definitely
forced
right.
out because of the
we've
costs.
we've been forced, because the costs have gone up so high, and the rates are comparing to the revenues they're sort of disproportionate. They're not aligned. It's sort of forced us to go to our suburbs. We're chasing higher revenues, like higher square metre rates.
Yep.
They sort of balance out a bit better. Where out in the west, it's just, you could almost say it's impossible now to do it.
Because it's a unique position at the moment. We've got the data side and then the practical side of why things aren't working. And we can see actually the data is telling us we're not going to hit this target. But then practically we can see on the ground the people that need to deliver this housing are telling us that we're not going to deliver this target. So it's concerning when the data actually matches what's happening on the ground, because sometimes there's a disconnect between data. What do you think is the main problem? What is the primary issue?
Oh, it's a few reasons. One, probably they're talking about economics and mortgages and servicing and all that. That's probably a smaller problem. I believe it's more the actual delivery, have the ability to deliver a product at the right price, factoring all the high rates, the cost of construction rising so fast in a short period of time, and the revenues haven't caught up. If the revenues were up 20 or 30%, they could probably factor in, but there isn't a headroom movement to move prices of the in value to go that fast, especially out west. They're just not there. They've gone up marginally, but that bit doesn't equate to all the balance of the rest of the items that have gone up.
Yeah, so
it's just squeezed us out.
So to put it simply, the cost to build and to then sell, it just doesn't leave much room.
It doesn't leave anything now. It's at zero virtually.
Especially in Western
That's why
Sydney.
there's no cranes out there.
Yeah. Is this a Sydney problem, or is it sort of Australia-wide? Do you think, Eliza?
I wouldn't just say it's Australia-wide. I'd say it's universal.
Worldwide. Universal.
Yeah.
Intergalactic.
Worldwide. Because a lot of the increase in construction costs that you're talking about come from the pandemic initially, at a time when we were increasing demand for new homes under the temporary home builder grant and renovations and all of the demand for labour and materials that come with that. The pandemic disrupted the labour market. It saw supply chain disruptions. We also saw the war in Ukraine increased costs for the raw materials that go into inputs like steel. Steel increased 42% in 2022. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the...
Hasn't really come down either.
Exactly.
Marginally, not much.
Exactly.
Can it come down once
Well,
it goes
should,
up?
but
Really?
Historically, when things go up, right?
Oh, not really. I've seen steel fluctuate over
Okay.
the years since I've been in the game. I've seen it go to 2,000 a tonne, then go down to 800 a tonne, then it sort of climb back up to 2,000. Now I think it's hovering in the 1,500, 1,600. I haven't looked at it recently, but I don't think it's ever going to drop down to 1,000 a tonne again.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that'll probably represent, what, 4 to 6, 7% of the overall cost on a
Well,
project.
it's probably the single biggest item.
Between that and concrete, maybe. And
Yeah, probably steel. Steel's probably the biggest one as a line item. Yeah.
What about labour?
No, I'm talking about materials.
Oh,
here.
just
the
talking
material.
materials, yeah.
On the material side, yeah.
Yeah, when it comes to the materials, steel probably had the biggest increase, but there was a pretty broad-based increase, right, in a lot of material costs. So timber and joinery was up 24% in the same year. And again, it all kind of came back to this excessive level of demand. You think about record low interest rates, and that was quite a global phenomenon as well, stimulating people buying more housing around the world at the same time that the inputs to supply are being really squeezed and stretched. And, on the labour perspective, I heard stories in Western Australia about people poaching bricklayers, driving to construction sites and saying, I'll pay you double whatever you're getting paid to put that brick down if you come with me and you come to my site. So these are the sorts of extremities that
Queensland's
we saw.
got that battle right now. They've still got it going. What I hear, I'm not building it in Queensland, but I hear it's just so much work going on. They've got the Olympics, they've got high demand of delivery. Everyone's fighting for the same people.
Totally.
Costs are much
Exactly.
higher there than
Yeah.
New South Wales.
Yeah, and there's a lot of big infrastructure projects, the construction to do with the Olympics, but also big transport infrastructure across the country that continues to kind of compete for that labour and some of the materials as well.
so it seems that we've recently heard there's aspirational targets now, 1.2, which I don't have I'm actually quite for to have an aspirational target. As a business owner myself, I think it's actually important to have both realistic targets and aspirational targets. But I think what's the impact now? If we can't hit this 1.2, what does the impact become for yourselves as delivering the projects, but also for the wider the community and the consumer itself. Well, what are the impacts if we don't hit that 1.2?
Higher rents. I suppose the consumer's going to get higher rents, and values may go up, may not. I don't know. I see, and I'm probably talking a little bit off topic, but I see most people can't afford New South Wales. So I see there's a trend there. They're coming to Sydney and they're taking off. Now, can we keep the people here? Can we keep the investment here? And can we keep the people staying here that actually migrating to Australia? So, you know, if prices are go, they're gonna top out somewhere. You know, what's going to be the damage of it? Only someone with a crystal ball knows that one. I don't think it's a good future if we don't deal with it.
Yeah, totally. It comes back to a lack of housing affordability. Housing affordability has always been bad in Sydney, but it's deteriorated really badly since the pandemic. And part of that is demand settings, but part of it is the inability to deliver more supply, this kind of plentiful housing supply. And like you say, and as we heard from the Productivity Commissioner, it creates a city without grandchildren, right?
That's
People
right.
have no choice but to move away. It's reflected in the people we know and love moving elsewhere to
can't
realise
afford
the
it.
Australian dream. It's reflected in interstate migration statistics. You look at New South Wales, it's always been persistently negative. We always lose more people from New South Wales to other states and territories than we gain. But again, it's really been decimated since the pandemic, and it's shown a little bit of an improvement, but still we're losing key workers, we're losing our friends and family, and that's just part of the kind of societal disruption that housing affordability issues create.
Does it get to a point where you can't deliver the 1.2 in supply? And so the demand is still there. It's rampant as ever, particularly in New South Wales and particularly in Sydney. And you're seeing it in Gosford areas, for example. If we can't deliver the supply, we think that probably prices will continue to rise if the demand is still there.
Logic would tell you that.
Yeah. Does it come down to the basic supply and demand economics of
Well,
the
you
old
think so.
school
That's what
supply
I'm
and
saying. You
demand?
think if they hold the supply so hard, prices are going to keep rising. I mean, is there a ceiling to that?
Yeah, you'd think.
Yeah.
That's the question, right?
Is there
Where
a ceiling
is
to that? That's what I'm saying. Is it
Yeah.
a ceiling to, you know, it sounds good in theory, you know, less supply, more demand, prices keep going up. But I think it's got to pop somewhere.
Well, I do
Yeah.
agree that there has to be a ceiling. I mean, they only get to a point where we're on lower deposits now as well, with 5% deposits. There's only so much room. The deposit situation has to move in, and then before it gets to a point where it's completely unaffordable for people to borrow funds. So it does get to a ceiling.
It's a
right?
sensitive topic. And I just, you know, I look at it, you know, being in the industry, I think to myself, is single ownership going to be a thing of the past?
Yeah.
You know, is it going to be all you know, big institutions like super funds and all that owning blocks of units, and everyone's going to be a renter? I sort of ask myself that question quite regular, because I'm just seeing that gap is getting bigger and bigger for single ownership. You know, people having their own property.
Yeah, and
It may not happen today or tomorrow, but it's trending that way.
But you
Yes,
can
and I think, Chris, to your point, this is it's like, how far can we be pushed? You know, it used to be that a 20-year home loan was a norm. Now it's a 30-year home loan. Now you've got the 5% deposits in play. Then you get eventually more people living per dwelling, and now I think in the past few years I've had a lot more inquiry from institutional
That's right, money. They're coming
because
in.
they're the ones. If you say, is there a limit? I don't think there's a limit, because we're talking about assets. That's always going to attract investment. It's who gets
It's
to
who's
own the
investing.
asset.
That's what I'm saying. Single ownership, I almost feel it's going to be a thing of the past.
Unless
Yeah.
we do something about it, right? Unless
Well-
we push back, and it depends on your ideology and whether you support institutional or individual home ownership.
Well, I'll go out on a limb and talk on this, because I mean, a couple of years back we had a foreign buyer policy that came out to affect stamp duty, which really took the sting out of the market, from particularly with Chinese buyers, for example. But I think potentially we've just shifted the ownership. Instead of foreign individuals coming in, we've just changed it to foreign corporations. And that's
right.
maybe that's the elephant in the room talk, and I'm happy to talk on
No,
that.
so I'm saying, where does I see it going? I'm seeing it trending that way.
Yeah.
More
And,
so.
and to
Yeah.
your point, Eliza, I think that's actually, it comes to there is no ceiling then, because when you've got institutional capital coming in, it almost gets to a point where, forget the returns, it's parking the funds into a safe asset, particularly if interest rates continue to go lower.
Potentially. I think there's still some room for, industry representatives, let's say, if they choose to lobby for tax breaks for the institutional investors. For example, under current land tax settings, it doesn't stack up as well to invest in build to rent in Australia as it does elsewhere, because if you own one apartment, then you're much less likely to pay land tax than if you own the whole block, right? So, but do those tax breaks come into play? Does government get pushed to do that, to invite in the institutional investment?
That's where it's getting forced. Like there is a bit of exemption on land tax, for instance, already, for if you're BTR. I mean, it's sort of the government's sort of pushed in that way, because if they don't do it, where are people going to live? They've got to bring in the big monies to build big blocks of units for people to live in them, because it's almost to the point where single ownership is becoming extremely difficult.
But you mentioned renters earlier. At what point do we start saying, because at the moment
Can't
it's all
afford the
about you
rents.
can't afford to buy. At what point do we go, we can't afford to rent? And we're already starting to see it. We had a post go viral on Instagram and TikTok this week, basically interviewing a young lady in Bondi whose rent was going up by like 40% next year, so she had to move. Now
She was paying $600 per
she's paying
week,
$600,
but she's with her friends, so
yeah.
she's actually paying $1,350 a week. It was going up to $1,350.
And so she's saying, how do I afford to rent in Sydney, let alone how do I buy in Sydney? So maybe that's where we start to see some ceilings as well, like, because there's always got to be, even if institutions are buying these properties, you still need the tenant, right? You still need a customer, and if they can't afford the rent, then that's the ceiling. It just happens later.
Rent's always government values anyway.
Yeah.
Your catalyst is always rent, yields.
And so does the aspiration of the 1.2 affect the decision making over the next 3 to 4 years? Because I kind of imagine Albanese, he's like the pilot of a big plane in a cockpit, and he's got a lot of buttons and levers he can push, and he pushes one button, it can be a disastrous plane crash, or he pushes another one and it's crisis averted. But I think the problem is you've got the cabin crew speaking to him, you've got all the passengers also speaking to him with their different points. Does it get to a point where he's just got to make the decisions for the wider community, and is he going to make decisions where to get that 1.2 million aspirational target, some incorrect decisions or some tax breaks could be appropriated?
Well, how much, the government can put out this 1.2 million, and we've spoken about this in the past, right? They can put out this target, but then the industry needs to try and meet that target or deliver that target. Albanese's not out there on site digging holes and building apartments or homes. So the interesting part is, what level of consultation went into this at the start? Was it ambitious? Do you think it was too ambitious, or do you...
Look, again, I don't think you can slam government for being ambitious. I think it's actually refreshing to see a leader that has an aspirational target, as opposed to if he knew that they could hit 800,000 target and coming out saying we're going to build 700 and hitting 800 to look like a hero. I'd prefer that you go for 1.2 and hit 900 and hit a million, because then you get close to
I don't
your
think they
target.
would have just come up with 1.2 willy-nilly. It would have been, through information they got, stats. That's what we need.
But so we do need, like, it's
deaths
based
and
on
births and immigration, all that, and what's already there. That number would have been formulated.
So the number was, this is what we need. It's higher than we've ever had before, year on year.
Place is getting bigger though.
But then it's getting bigger, so we need that, right? But the question, should there be a further follow-up question being like, okay, how do we get there? Yeah. Let's bring in the industry. Let's bring in developers, builders, everyone. How do we actually do this?
Yeah, well, I think like I said, is in the cockpit. There's different buttons to push. I think there's a lot of buttons, and I don't think the target is completely over. I know there's a lot of commentators out there saying it's dead in the water.
So you think we can still hit?
Look, construction, and Andrew would know this better than everyone. If you've got your DAs, there's a lot of DAs that people are sitting on that don't work. Yeah. As an example, I can think of 10 sites out Western Sydney that don't work. You give them the land for free, and it still doesn't work. You put zero in that cost.
Well, there's other problems too outside. Even if they did stack up, you still got to deliver them. We got it's a place is heavily regulated. There's not many, like, especially now, space class 2 builders. Most of them have disappeared. They're not around. So it's really, it's more than just one problem here. Even if all the plants lined up now, you still got to get someone to do the job.
Yep.
We've got a labour problem. We've got a skilled labour problem. It's a systematic issues, like one layer upon another one. Yeah.
So there's I know we're going around about here in terms of going to the immigration discussion. Are we bringing the wrong types of workers into the country to actually help us?
I wouldn't say the wrong. I think they need to maybe have a variation of not just white collar. They need some blue collar skilled people. I mean, I don't want to go into that topic too much, but yeah, look, I think not so much bringing in people. I think they need to really focus harder on educating people through the system to do the trades. We're just not getting enough trades through our techs. I'm not seeing it. It's a real drop off, and that's a problem.
That's a shame to see.
Having plumbers, electricians, carpenters, bricklayers, all these guys. The young kids, they're not coming through the ranks as much as they should be. That's the people. They're the future.
Well, I don't know. This is personal stories, but I've got a big family. I don't know, and I know a lot of people. I don't know any young kids that are saying, "Oh yeah, I'm going to be a brickie."
No, it's over.
I haven't.
I tell you, this is a really, really big problem. I mean, saying you're going to migrate these people, I don't know if that's going to be the fixer. It's somehow we've got to get in the system and start, promoting it harder to get people to do trades. We need tradespeople.
I think it's a bit of both, right? Because if you are able to attract skilled labour, then they're presuming there's some kind of streamlining of the qualification recognition between countries and states. At least you can get them on the ground relatively quickly. Whereas if you're investing in people to go to TAFE and study these construction trades now, it's going to be years before they can actually
it's going to be years. That's what I'm saying. This is not so you talk about 1.2 million. I personally can't see it because there's a lot of systematic problems here. Not one.
And you're on the ground trying to deliver it.
That's why you need people to do the job. There's just not enough people.
For sure. But at least I think we've identified a area where the government can create some investment and influence is by investing in more education for the trades, helping businesses take on and see apprenticeships to completion, because there can be drop off there as well. And the nature of Australian businesses, a lot in the construction industry as well, is they're relatively small. So it's hard for them to scale. It's hard for them to afford to bring on apprentices. So maybe that's where the government, and I think that has been a recommendation as well.
They're trying, but it needs to be more of it. More, and it's like what you said. Even if you start today, that succession will take a few years. It's not going to happen overnight, and we need people. We need numbers now. Like, how do you fix it up?
And you alluded to a lot of the smaller builders going out of business. There's been more than 3,000 since COVID.
Well, it's not as small; it's big as well.
Smaller and bigger, all different sizes, and so it's hard to build that straight back up. And whether it was due to the fixed
to both your points, of maybe there's a short-term and a long-term strategy that they approach. I mean, the traineeships and getting people through in a trade absolutely should be a long-term strategy. But I don't know. I mean, to your point, I don't know if it's still possible. Do people still leave at the age of 16 from school to do a trade? I mean, is that still
not really?
Is that still
not
a
really?
thing?
It's not a big thing.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to be a white collar. Everyone wants to be educated and be in an office. The days of the migrants. Like the time when I was a kid, and people even younger than me. The first thing you'd want to do is get out and do a trade. I don't think that's really a real desire anymore.
A couple of generations ago, you'd see people leaving school in Year 10, for example, and going and doing a trade.
Yes.
Now they don't. And now, there are some schools, especially out in Western Sydney, where they incorporate the TAFE tech aspect into Year 11 and 12. Yep. So they're doing that really. I think that's interesting to see, and we probably need more of that. But there's no way. It's all about getting your HSC.
Look, it's a long-term play. It's not going to solve it within the 1.2 million in the next 4 years. It's not going to solve it.
That's what I'm saying. What happens now in the short term? How do we do it?
Yeah. Well, look, a good example, and I talked about this on a previous panel, was the Snowy Hydro back 60 or 70 years ago. They brought 70% of the labour in.
Yeah, my father was
overseas.
Yeah.
And they went on to do trades.
My father came on the Snowy River Scheme program, building the dams down there.
Correct.
It was Carbone there. Yeah.
And that was
immigration, in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Yeah. Like that era, people are getting migrated. They're not them type of skilled people anymore. They're coming in, they're doing IT and whatnot, accounting.
100%. My wife's grandfather came over from Italy as a stone mason.
Yeah, stonemason, yeah.
Opera house, building the opera house.
Yeah.
And obviously not just him. That would have been quite an exercise, but there was plenty of them for all Europeans building these things, whether it's the Harbour Ridge, the Opera House, Snowy Hydro.
So I think that's really the three key metrics with building and getting a project done is obviously the availability of labour, construction costs, and the material as well. So that's to me a practical solution how we can look at the labour, bringing the right immigration into the country that's going to help build the housing supply that we need, similar to a Snowy Hydro approach, which was 70% of immigration to build those projects. But then a long-term play with trades and upskilling and apprenticeships and getting them through the program.
Look, and the migration thing is good in theory as well, but then it comes back to where do they live? All right,
That's right, what happens in between?
It's his big.
It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah, it's his vicious cycle. So does that then create more demand?
Yeah, it definitely does, but you need to bring the right skills in to be
Yeah.
able to build through that.
So you're saying keep the level of immigration, or don't touch the levels too much, but like change who we're bringing.
Well, I mean,
forward.
Andrew probably talked on how his father lived when they came in and how they housed that settlement. It wasn't how we're all housed in the suburbs. It was
No,
very
they're
different.
they're living in camps. Yeah, camps.
Living in camps, and then they were there for a 2-year apprenticeship, effectively.
3 or 4 years
and
they'd
then they
work
went
on
across.
those camps. Yeah, that was the way in, into the country. Skilled people.
Skilled migration, but that was the foundation of the current generation who are now heading off into retirement. The current generation of trades.
And we could also point out that, so this was your father, that his son went on to develop lots of houses.
Yeah.
So, if you do get the mix and the skills right, then it can really add to potentially the productivity of housing construction as well.
Yeah, I love that. It's from the start. I mean, these migrant stories are my favourite. Obviously. Are we creating too much on the demand side as well? I mean, we've seen 5% deposit schemes and all these sorts of things, and maybe these are, if we're going back to your Albanese flying the plane in the cockpit analogy, and he's pushing buttons. The only buttons he seems to be able to push is demand side buttons, not the supply side.
Yeah, and ramping up the demand side rather than easing demand. And this is maybe where you and I might differ in our opinions, is that I do think that if you can't address with affordability with supply in the short term, why not look at cooling demand? The answer, the risk, is that you further affect feasibility of new construction projects, right? But you can see what's going on in Melbourne at the moment, where in mid-2023, they announced additional taxes and charges on specifically investment properties, where they reduced the land tax threshold to $50,000 on investment properties. And a lot of people were worried that it was going to affect investor demand and feasibility of new housing, which it has, but it's also contributed to slower price growth, a leading share of first home buyer loans as all mortgages, and improved affordability as incomes have outpaced growth in housing across Melbourne. There are other reasons that Melbourne's property market has been subdued, not just the demand side. But I think even if you look at other examples, like in 2017, when they introduced a temporary cap on interest-only lending, which at the time were actually still are majority taken on by investors, so indirectly targeting investors in 2017, property prices fell sharply and rapidly in Sydney and Melbourne. So I think we've seen evidence of reducing investor demand in the market, taking some heat out of property prices. The question is then, how do you still keep supplying property to keep it low? And that's probably where more government housing, non-market housing plays a role.
Do governments actually want to keep housing low? Is there when you look at, I'm sure they do surveys on this all the time about how to win elections and whatnot. I mean, 2/3 of the population probably want property to continue to go up, right? The owners and the ones that own their property outright and ones with mortgages. There's a segment, which is a growing segment, that aren't able to crack home ownership, that they know they're not going to win those votes, but they focus on winning, 35% of the popular vote these days to win an election. Do they actually want prices to go down or to stay flat, which means they're also going down in effect?
Yeah, it's a great point, and it's probably the point and the reason that we don't see more action on the demand side and targeting policies that would bring prices down. We had both the housing minister and the shadow housing minister before the election say that they would like to keep home values continue rising, albeit lower than income growth, which made me quite disappointed, to be honest. But as an economist, I look at it and I'm like, well, actually Australians, even though they might not want, of course they wouldn't want their home values to go down, but they could afford it, most of them. So I looked at resales data. If you brought down housing values by 10% in the June quarter of this year, the median gain from resale of a home would still have been $260,000. If you look at the equity position, so these politicians cited the fear of negative equity as a reason that they wouldn't want home values to come down.
Oh, yeah,
The
cause massive problems, yeah.
But the RBA has done modelling to suggest that even if home values fell 30% overnight, 90% of households would still have positive equity. So
It's a big call.
but housing values have gone up 47% across Australia in the past 5 years.
I feel
So
that when
it's-
property is up, people feel rich as well, right? They feel like they
That's
can
right,
spend more.
yes.
Like a good example, my parents were only owned the one house, but back in the day when they wanted to buy a car, they'd use their house as the piggy bank, and that's how they get to the next step. So how do you actually, that wealth effect, and what are the impacts if people can't take an extra 20 or 30 or 50,000 out of their home to go on a
I
holiday?
just don't think people would like the fact that properties are going down in value. Everyone measures their position of what their home's worth. For it to drop 30% across the board.
I think there's a
But
reason.
just as an
Yeah.
example,
Yeah.
even if you brought home values down 5 or 10%, something that enabled the gap between income and values to close even a little. I think their point was that Australia's housing market is incredibly financially stable from that perspective, and that even a loss in home value would still have most households in a positive equity position.
And based on those numbers, I can see both sides, right? Because based on those numbers, yeah, if I still have positive equity after a drop like that, if that a hypothetical drop,
You'd
if I'm not selling,
feel pretty poor.
but if I'm
though.
not selling the house today, it doesn't really matter to me it's not until I sell that I realise the gain or the loss or what have you. It would affect anyone that's bought recently, that's for sure. But at the same time, there's a reason why, if there's an auction down the street, the whole street goes to see what it sells for, because they want to know what their house is worth. And
I
feel
think it
good
also
about
has-
it.
it's-
So-
What would the catalyst of that 30% drop be? But, really, the first line would be that rents would have to drop. Now, the rents is always your catalyst to your values.
Do you think? I hear that a lot.
Always,
but
it's
there's a
all
big-
yield driven. Everything you break it down, it always comes back down to yield.
So gross rent yields across Australia are just 3.7% in the residential sector, which to me seems pretty low. I wonder if the negative gearing policy, as we've had it in place, has separated the concept of value from where rents are. But that's just from the established housing. I appreciate it might be different in the new housing sector. I've always heard that, but I'm not sure. Investors, their activity seems to follow capital gain, and because of the way negative gearing is in Australia, they are more concerned with the value of the home than the value of rent, and rent is more just determined by the supply and demand of rental property. I don't know.
But I think if the demand side falls off as well, that's a massive catalyst. And so if rents are dropping, then people would look to go to home ownership and that. But I think the wider issue is, there'll be huge impacts if 30% drop. To forget just the mums and dads, all the banks. Strong banks create a strong economy.
That's exactly where the RBA is coming
Superannuation
from.
Well,
accounts,
all of it,
everything
yeah.
there'll be a
That's
massive
That's
impact,
a systematic issue. That would be, 30%.
I think what the RBA was saying, though, with that analysis is that our system is so strong that it could sustain that kind of price fall.
So they're using an extreme case to just showcase what you're saying, and realistically, a crash. And I'm using bunny ears for anyone that's listening and not watching, but a crash could be like 10%. Could be a lot less than that, right? If that were to happen.
Well, when you look
And
at the
if
GFC, going back to the GFC, what was the percentage that fell?
8% peak to trough nationally.
And imagine at 30, it was
Yep.
it was a
Yep.
disaster. At 8, at 30, I wouldn't want to be there. I think it'd be a disaster.
Yeah, and there are economic risks, and
Yeah.
you're quite right, Chris, about the wealth effects that come with housing value increases as well. So I've not seen or done any modelling on that more peripheral economic impact.
When's the last time the market dropped by 30%?
Nationally, I've never seen it drop by that
No,
much.
by any data. Is there any data out there the markets have dropped 30%?
There
in
are
Australia?
markets that have fallen in. Yeah, you'd have your
Spain,
boom
I
and
believe,
bust mining markets.
Mine,
in
yeah,
Western
that's but in
Australia.
certain sectors of it, as a group, as a whole country, has there ever been historic data that markets dropped 30%?
Housing?
Yeah,
No.
So for them to make that call, it's like
But the court- I think-
that's a big call.
And it-
But I will say the court. They're not
to say
saying
it wouldn't be an impact.
They're not saying it
I
will
don't have to
happen.
agree with that one.
I think it's just a hypothesis, right?
They're just
It's
saying from an equity
yeah.
position, they're saying like how much equity do people have in their homes, and they're using estimates of outstanding mortgage balances to assess the financial stability of the financial and housing market.
The other really interesting part of that is now with the 5% deposit scheme, with 15% being guaranteed by the government, if they have a vested stake now, even more so. I mean, New South Wales government is the biggest landholder as it is, irrespective. But they now have even more of a stake to ensure that property prices continue to rise. Otherwise, they're on the hook for 200,000 people, if that's how many apply for it, under the 15% guarantee, so which is taxpayer funded. So there's a real battle that I see coming out where the government has to play a real interesting role where they can't actually see property prices fall. Otherwise, it's going to be an election nightmare in 2 or 3 years' time.
I think the expansion of that scheme definitely speaks to a government that is leaning into rising house values over time.
Yeah.
For sure.
Let's. This is phenomenal. I actually love the data versus the on the ground gut feel.
Yeah.
Like I'm actually loving both those sides. They're not too far apart, to be honest with you.
Well, I think you're sort of
aren't
saying the same sort of, I mean, you're delivering it practically and you know how difficult it is. That's why you've moved out of Western Sydney, which is disappointing because, in my opinion, having exposure to multiple developers across the whole country. If a developer such as Alan, who is a builder developer, a high quality developer, can't deliver the housing that we need, then to be honest, I don't think anybody can. And that's a massive problem. I don't even think state government could if they were building back in the Landcom days. So I think that's a massive problem. And if we can't see that affordable, call it that I can't believe I'm saying sub $1 million is affordable, but if we call that affordable sort of price range can't be delivered, then we're seeing a huge problem for for aspirational first-time buyers to come into the market. And I think that's a problem. So I'm hopeful that we can hit the $1.2 million or 1.2 million target of homes that can be achieved. I hope we can hit that.
Well, let's go rapid fire to end this, and there'll be a few questions. We'll go around the table. Not in order of how I've sent these to you guys, right? But let's start with that. So reality check. Where do you think we'll be midway through? So October 27.
October 2027. Well, I'm hoping we're sitting at about 600,000. I hope we're halfway.
So you think we get?
I'm hoping. Hope is not a good strategy, mind you, but I'm hoping that they can actually get there. And I think that the government will, unfortunately or fortunately, however you look at it, depending on which side of the equation you sit on, will push some of those cockpit buttons to achieve their targets. I don't think it's over. I think they could pull some levers. A very simple one would be, imagine if they wipe the GST for a 12-month period for anyone that gets started on their projects in the next 12 months, sub a particular price range, adding 7 to 10% back into a feasibility. That's a lever that they could pull, and that's a tax that could happen. So I don't think we should write it off. I like that it's aspirational, but there are levers that they can pull that could stimulate the economy and get people moving.
You're digging into one of my other rapid fire questions. One policy change.
I'm done then. So on to the next.
You're good. Andrew, 2027 October, halfway. Do we get there?
I don't know. It's a big question. That's a big question. I don't think so. Not even close. Yeah. You're saying 600? I don't know. What's the number right now?
So it's 27% below target right now.
I think it's about 180, 167 or something.
Can we get the numbers? Tell us we can't get there if it keeps going this way. Eliza, can we do it?
I don't see it happening under current market conditions.
I think it'll deteriorate even more.
So
it's not improving. I think it's actually the gap's bigger.
And so what?
Just productivity alone. It's good. You can implement tax breaks. Like you said, maybe they can get rid of the servicing buffer and all that.
Yep.
It'll help maybe fuel up more buyers to be in the market, but we've still got to deliver them. I know. I'm not talking Australia wide here. I'm saying here in Sydney, what we do. I can't see it. I can't see it. I mean, we're all toying with these ideas on modulation and all that, but that's that's going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight to boost productivity up in a short period, like that couple of years. I don't see it. No,
because the way I see it is,
I don't like being a bearer of bad news, but I think over time we will improve, but not in that short period.
So you think there's a bit of pain to get through this before we can actually get to the end?
Look, the government, one thing, Chris Minns, commend him. He's on the right trajectory. He's a good forward thinker. He knows the problem, very conscious of it, and he's pushing the right direction. But it's just so many other moving parts there to get it there.
Well, that's a good point.
Yeah.
We've talked about Albanese. Now we're talking Chris Minns, New South Wales. Where do state governments and national government, where do they need to work together? because there might be a little bit of
On the GST.
on the Well, okay, so your one policy change was
Well, the way I look at it,
The servicing buffer would be one as well.
Yeah.
3% servicing buffer.
On the mortgage rate?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because they originally put it in was a good move when the rates were really low, so they put it in as a risk factor, knowing the rates are going to go up. Now the rates have gone up, the servicing buffer's still there, so that part I'm not understanding why they didn't reduce it.
Yeah,
I don't get why they haven't done
especially
that.
when it's sitting at 3%. I mean,
It's
that makes
just too
sense
much.
during COVID. I agree. I don't think
Yeah,
it
because
makes
the rates
sense.
were so
Well,
low,
when
the
it's too-
benchmark
yeah,
was
when
so low.
it's-
You knew they were going to move up. It was very smart they did that.
I was on a panel, and I wish I could remember who said it now, but someone much cleverer than me was saying that one design alternative could be a counter-cyclical buffer. So when interest rates are lower, your buffer goes up. And then when interest rates start to rise, your buffer comes down because the rise in interest rates kind of automatically makes lending
Once
a bit
you've
more
hit-
conservative.
Well, that's what happened, but they didn't take it off, and it's still there.
That's right.
Yeah, that's like for me on the point of mortgages and funding. That would be, I think it'd be. I just said on the coalface, a lot of people they got good jobs and got good incomes, but they just can't service because their buffer kills them.
Well, because the buffer would be at, 8 or 9% at the moment.
That's
So
right.
they're servicing, seeing if they
right.
can service at 8
So
or 9%.
even the stimulant the government gives in at 5% no mortgage insurance, the issue is you've still got to service at 9%.
Yeah, at a higher LVR as well. The
Yeah,
95%.
that's right. So it's like
it's a double
you're
whammy.
you're fighting with yourself. Like, and I was looking at some stats on the weekend. And I was saying, the market's moving up. Where the move up is where the properties were like probably second hand. They're really low. They're really low threshold. So there's a bit more demand there. All the auction clearance rates in the lower suburbs of Sydney. It's sort of I can see it's trending up a bit, but it's still come to that ceiling, and it's not. It can't go any higher because the servicing kills them. Yeah, that's your limits. So one of them I would say if they
Look at
if
the
they
buffer
look
rates.
at the buffer, it would be a big one.
So
yeah?
buffer for mortgages, GST
That's
exemptions for
that's me
developers.
on the coalface. Going for get all the feedback from people getting mortgages. In our space we play in.
Eliza, if you had a magic wand, one policy change, there's probably a few.
Well, I think like we've discussed, there's so many areas that do need attention. And productivity in construction seems to be the big one. How you wave a wand and do that overnight, I have no idea. But I think maybe some flexibility in the serviceability buffer could be a good option, particularly for people who are trying to buy their own home. If there's also some kind of streamlining, I hear, and Andrew, perhaps you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that there is a challenge for the mobility of construction labour because someone's qualification in one state might not, match another. So making sure that we have the, legislative framework to make the mobility and the productivity of labour as strong as possible.
It's been a great convo, and like I said, I love having each side because for me, I'm a very gut feel kind of guy, but I also know the data speaks volumes as well. So to have both aspects there, Chris, you're a bit of both as well, so that's pretty good. But let's wrap things up. Let people know, Eliza, where can they find you? Is there anything you want to spruik or point out?
I hadn't thought about that actually. My only social media at the moment is LinkedIn. So if you want to look up Eliza Owen on LinkedIn, you can follow me there and be kind. But
a lot of great little videos from you as
Thank
well.
you.
I saw a good one yesterday on that Melbourne. You started tapping into that Melbourne
So
discussion.
market
That was really
updates
cool.
can be found there for sure.
I love the market updates. Andrew, anything you're doing or that A-Land's doing, you can spruik any of the projects that you got going at the moment. Anything you want to?
Well, we actually got one coming up in Gosford, the Amalfi.
Lovely.
That's the new one on the block. Yeah,
Lovely. That sounds
quite
amazing. The Amalfi.
Yeah, it's quite an
as an
exciting
Italian
project.
name,
Yeah, it's coming up now very shortly. We're going to launch it. We've also got the Walden in North Sydney. That's been launched. It's tracking well.
Yep, fantastic.
That's a great product. Yeah, great offering in a new space. We haven't been in that luxury up end market, but we're there now and we're tracking well.
Congratulations, well done.
Thank you.
We'll add some links in show notes as well. Chris, everyone knows Coposit, obviously.
They know Coposit,
If they're
mate. I
listening
think
to this, they know who we are.
my final thoughts, if the government needs some advice, let us know.
Let us
happy
know.
to
We'll
fix the
record,
housing
we'll
supply
record
overnight.
another episode. Lovely, guys. Well, that's been us for Property Now this week. We'll be back next week, and I want to thank everyone again for joining me today.
This is Jason He, the sexiest voice in property, here to tell you that the Property Now podcast offers opinions on Australian property news for informational and entertainment purposes only and general in nature. It does not take into account your objectives, financial situation, or needs. It does not constitute professional advice. always seek expert guidance before making any property-related decisions.